Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Ready to pop the question? The jewelers at BlueNile.com have got sparkle down to a science with beautiful lab-grown diamonds worthy of your most brilliant moments. Their lab-grown diamonds are independently graded and guaranteed identical to natural diamonds, and they're ready to ship to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code LISTEN to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code LISTEN at BlueNile.com for $50 off. BlueNile.com, code LISTEN.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hi everybody, my name's John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and a film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to Mark Searby. He is a journalist and writer, and he has written a wonderful book on Al Pacino. Al Pacino, The Movies Behind the Man, which is a film-by-film survey of the prolific career of Al Pacino, one of the finest screen actors ever. It's a long conversation, so I'm going to keep this introduction quite short. Just to remind you, if you do enjoy the conversation, please spread the word as much as you can, like, subscribe, etc. And if you wish to join me on Twitter, follow me on Twitter, you can do at drjonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation.
Well, I'm not originally from Essex anyway. Right. I'm originally from Nottingham and moved down to Essex just after 2000. A woman, as to be expected, of course. You know that, as you know. Listen, you're from England and you're now in Italy, so you know how that works. I'd always been a fan of Pacino. I think that was the thing. Is that I had seen several films. I was obsessed with Scent of a Woman growing up. It was the one film I would rent from the local video shop constantly. And I don't think, maybe it was to do with Pacino, I don't know. I think it was more to do with the fact that there was this man who was standing up for school kids and shouting at teachers that I kind of liked about it. I didn't really understand the nuances of the character and the story and the journey that Chris O'Donnell's character goes on. I didn't understand any of that. So I think it was more, as I said, just the shouting in it, which obviously we'll come to when we're talking about Pacino shouting.
Your sort of entry drug for Pacino was kind of quite late period. Scent of a Woman is interesting because it really does demark as well one of the many periods of his career.
If you look at the periods of his career, in the 90s is shouty Pacino. Let's be honest here. There are some films where he's not shouting at all in the 90s, but nobody saw them because everybody wants him to be shouting and screaming at people and whatever else. So I kind of came to it in the 90s, the Pacino catalogue, but only the new stuff. As I said, Scent of a Woman, Dick Tracy as well in there, Any Given Sunday, The Insider, things like that. And it was only later on, when I was late 20s, early 30s, something like that, that I started to go back and see other films of his, ones that I hadn't seen. You know, like obviously I'd seen The Godfather on the TV, but never really loved it, I guess. I just sort of appreciated it, never really loved it. Other films, Sea of Love, Dog Day Afternoon, obviously Bobby Difford, all of these I went back. And I think that's where my appreciation of Pacino's work started. And then it just kind of escalated from there, where I just became obsessed with having to own every single film he had ever done. And obviously this was in the VHS, slowly turning into DVD era. So there were films that he had made that had never got a UK release. Insomnia, I remember Insomnia. I had to buy that from the US because it had not been released here in the UK. It got a release much later on. And this is a film that's Al Pacino versus Robin Williams, and obviously now directed by Christopher Nolan as well. But it didn't get a big, huge UK release, and I had to import it from the US, and it cost me something like £50. You know, I mean, you say that now and people are like, £50, that's ridiculous. But that's the price you used to pay when you were importing VHSs here in the UK. And I think it went from there. And then my career sort of took a weird turn into doing film criticism. And I was writing for a sadly now defunct magazine called New Empress. And my editor, Helen Cox, who's from the north of England, we used to go out drinking in London. And you know what happens when you get drunk and somebody gives you an idea? And you think that's the greatest idea in the world, isn't it? You know, at 2 a.m. in Soho or something. And she had said, listen, you should write something about Pacino. More than just an article, you should write a book. And I said, but there's already a great book out there, which is the official biography by Lawrence Grobel. I said, and Andrew Yule did a kind of interesting book called Life on the Wire. I said, but I what would I write? You know, I don't know. And she said, well, you should just write it. You should just write it. And then I couldn't get the idea out of my head of thinking, well, maybe I should do it. I don't know. What's stopping me? You know, nothing is stopping me at all. So I thought, well, I don't want to do a standard biography because that's already been done. It seems kind of pointless to do a retread of that. So I spent months trying to think of the hook of what to write for the book, basically. And then all of a sudden, two things hit me very quickly. One of them was, we'll do a real in-depth dive into each individual film. You know how you see these huge look backs that people like Variety do, or Hollywood Reporter, or Empire do, that are like, you know, 5 or 6 pages. And they speak to people and it's really in depth. This is where they filmed and this is how it got made and all of that. And I thought, okay, I could do that. That's not a problem, I don't think. But I still needed something else. And that's when it kind of hit me that maybe I should interview one person from every single film, because then you get a greater understanding of what it's like to work with Pacino.
Sort of like an oral history from other angles.
Yes, absolutely. Because you have these films which have got such a wide variety of people in them, not just actors. You know, there's other people, and that what happened with my book is that I ended up interviewing directors, producers, actors, magicians, you know, like just random people. And I just thought, well, this is kind of interesting. Maybe I should do this. And that's kind of where it started. And it just spiraled. And I just got my head down and just started writing. And I kind of enjoyed it.
When you were writing, were you doing it like sort of chronologically working through the films, or were you sort of like, well, these films are very available and I've got them in my house, so I'm going to do these first and then go back and fill in the gaps?
Well, the good thing was I had every single film in my house. There were some films that never got released here in the UK, only got released in the US in a box set, which I'd already bought anyway. You know, it was Al Pacino, An Actor's Vision, only available in the US, very limited quantity. I'd already bought it anyway, you know, being a huge Pacino fan. So the films that were in that box set, Looking for Richard, which is freely available around the world. But then there was 2 others, Local Stigmatic and Chinese Coffee, which were rare films, really rare. I mean, Pacino only showed these at like screenings for his friends. He didn't put them out into the world. I mean, one of them was made in 1990. And the first time anybody saw it was around 2007, the general public. So I had those films and I had the rest as well, you know, DVD, VHS. But to answer your question, I did the majority of them in chronological order. I had a list on my wall, basically, which I just printed off IMDb, to be honest, just ticked them off. That's all I did. I felt like, okay, I feel like I've done enough on that chapter. I will just tick it off. and that's that one done. And then it would sit there and, I'd tinker with it a little bit. And then I would send it to my editor, who turned out to be my old friend and ex-editor of New Empress, Helen Cox, who is still my editor, because I kind of trusted her. She's been an English teacher. She's got her own career putting out books as well now. She's hugely knowledgeable about film as well. I mean, you have to be when you're putting out a film magazine anyway. So I trusted her, and she gave great feedback as well. That was the thing. So I would send stuff over to her, and she would come back with notes, and then I would change it. It would go back. So it was kind of like doing I want to say a normal book. I mean, it is a normal book. That's the thing. But when you don't have a publisher, it can be difficult. I don't have a publisher. I self-published. That was the thing. So I know I couldn't just put something out because the spelling would have been terrible. There would have been apostrophes all over the place or something like that. So I knew I had to have an editor. Then I knew I had to have a proofreader as well. So I paid all of this myself. It just worked very nicely for me. I've got to be honest. I mean, it came to the point, to be honest with you, where I thought, I'll pitch this out to publishers. It's an interesting book. There's been the authorized biography, but the previous one to that was way back in the early 90s. I kind of thought it was kind of interesting. Pacino's still a huge person. You don't even need to say Al Pacino. You can just say Pacino. Everybody knows. It's like De Niro, basically. I pitched it to 5 publishers here in the UK. All of them had done film books as well, and they all turned it down. And it came to the point, this is the point where I thought, do you know what, I'm just going to do this myself, is that one of them turned around and said, well, is Al Pacino relevant anymore?
Oh dear.
I know.
Oh dear.
I know. That was the thing. So I kind of get it to a certain degree, in that it was at a point where he was making some small art house films, like Manglehorn and things like that. But it's Al Pacino. He's always going to be relevant, even when he had the 4 years off camera. He's always going to be relevant because of his history and because of the films that he's done and because of him being a pioneer of acting as well. And when somebody turned around and said, is he relevant? I just kind of thought, you know what? I'm just going to do it myself. It makes sense. And that's how it all happened, basically. In a quick nutshell, to be honest. I mean, there was a lot of periods where I'm like, this is just terrible. This is absolutely terrible, which I imagine most writers have told you on this podcast. You just look at it and you think, this is awful. I'm just going to scrap the whole project. I mean, there were moments where I had sent chapters over to a couple of film critics who I respected here in the UK and said, would you mind reading this? I'm doing this project very secretly. And I thought, if they turn around and they say they hate it, I'm going to scrap the entire thing. And this was about 3/4 of the way, having written the book as well.
A lot of time invested.
But I just thought, if they don't like it, it's just going to be laughed off the face of the planet. But fortunately, they turned around and they said, actually, do you know what? This is really interesting. I would change these bits. I would do this and whatever else. They gave great notes. I think that was the thing. And for somebody who's never written a book in their life, to have that sort of feedback really helped. It really helped me focus even more. And it kind of gave me that impetus of, okay, what you're doing is kind of interesting here and you should expand on it. And a lot of people did like the interviews as well. I think as I said, because it gives a different dimension, you're reading about how it got made and little nuggets of information that maybe the directors put out in interviews or something else like that. But when you have an actor or somebody or a director or a writer or somebody like that come and giving their true side of the story, and years later as well, let's face it, that's the good thing about it. Gray Frederickson, who I interviewed for the Godfather trilogy, he's the main producer on he's the main producer on 2 and 3. He was just a producer on the first one. He gave so many great stories that he had never given before. And I think that was the beautiful thing about it, is that he felt free to be able to tell a lot of good stories that, if the film had come out just recently, he'd be very much on it's the promotional trail. But he was great, but everybody was great. That was the thing, there was nobody who had a bad thing to say about Pacino. Even in, this context where I'm like, well, look, it's an unofficial book. You can say what you want. It's no problem. But nobody had anything bad to say about him. Everybody had great things to say. And I think that certainly filled me with a lot of happiness, knowing that he doesn't seem to have changed in his 60 years of acting. He still is kind of like it's his first day on set of his first ever film. And yet here he is working with Scorsese and De Niro and Pesci, and he's trying to work out who this actor is, who this character is at the same time, and yet he's sat there on set with headphones and a little iPod listening to the speeches and everything else like that. And it's just kind of, it's interesting. It doesn't feel like he's become this huge actor surrounded by a bubble at all. He's not surrounded by yes men. And I think that's what I liked about speaking to these people, is that they all had great stories, fun stories as well.
What I liked about the interviews were, because you were choosing people, because it wasn't Pacino or it wasn't necessarily a main like co-star, you just got this very different perspective. And some of the people you're talking to just gave really interesting and sort of quite human stories, but also a little bit more of an insight into the filmmaking process.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. I'm going to write that down and make sure I mention that next time in another. But you're right. It's kind of interesting because obviously people go, well, what do you write about Jack and Jill? Let's be honest. It is a terrible film. But I managed to write 7 pages about it because it's kind of interesting how Adam Sandler ropes in Al Pacino to play his leading man who is romanced by Adam Sandler in drag as his sister. I mean, it's ridiculous as it sounds anyway. And then you watch the film, you're like, this is even worse. But how does that come about? But that's what I found in the book, is that I'm like, okay, this is how it all came about. And then I interviewed the director, Dennis Duggan, who's worked with Adam Sandler many times, actually.
Right, yeah.
And I kind of said to him, look, this is all well and good, but you do realize that this got an absolute hammering by the critics. People literally hate this film. And he gave a really honest answer, and I'm really appreciative of him actually doing this. And he turned around and he said, listen, I don't listen to the critics, and neither does Adam either. He said, we're looking at the box office. And he said, this film made over 200 million worldwide. He said, that's enough for us. And you know what? As much as I'm kind of like, yes, but it's not an art form, if I'm going to be a snooty critic about it, I'm kind of like, yes, but it's not an art form. This is Pacino who did Godfather and Serpico, and he becomes the character. But at the same time, when you turn around and you go, well, listen, Adam Sandler film, 200 million at the box office, you can't really disagree with that answer.
I mean, it's a good point, because I think there are people that I've met as well in doing junkets and interviews and whatnot, and they're well aware that they're not producing art, they're producing a product and they're producing content. And for them, it's not a choice. It's not as if they're going, well, if I wasn't doing this, I could be doing art. It's like, Adam Sandler can maybe do Punch Drunk Love every now and again, and maybe do, step out of his comfort zone. But his comfort zone creates the freedom that allows him to do Punch Drunk Love. He's not doing Punch Drunk Love unless he does Jack and Jill and all the rest of it. And I think their awareness, as you say, the director's awareness and the everybody working on that film, it goes beyond. It's quite easy to overlook the critics. You just don't read the newspaper. You just don't read the trades. But then looking at it from from Al Pacino's point of view, I think serious actors as well have a kind of insecurity with comedy, and so I think you can see this with De Niro's career as well, where they don't know what's funny themselves. So they just say, okay, this guy's making the most popular comedy films, and so I'm going to go there and I'm going to do that. I think Pacino and De Niro, they can be very, very funny, but they're really, I don't think they're great when it comes to choosing scripts in that genre. I think they're much more hit and miss.
You see, that's an interesting point. I'm going to slightly disagree with you here, actually.
Go for it, man. You're the expert.
Because Pacino always wanted to be a comedian.
Right,
From a very young age, that's what he wanted to be. He wanted to be a comedian. At first, he wanted to be a clown. That's what he told his mum first. He wants to be a clown. And then obviously they realized that's not a career path for a kid from the Bronx at all. But he was really into comedy as a teenager. And he wanted to be a comedic actor. And then obviously his career just took off within 2 films. Let's be honest, he did NYPD Blue, which was 1 episode where it's a blink and you miss it. He then was in a Patty Duke film for about 5 minutes. Then he did The Panic in Needle Park, which obviously is an incredibly important film in terms of the way that they show drug taking. It was the first film that ever showed real drug taking, as in a needle going into skin in film history. And obviously, you know, that film launched Pacino's career because then Francis Ford Coppola saw that, wanted Pacino for the role of Michael Corleone. Paramount didn't want him. So Coppola had to screen Panic in Needle Park, and they turned around and said, okay, we get it now. Right, fine. But even at that point, even by the point of The Godfather, Pacino was like, well, I'll probably just do 2 or 3 straight films and then get on the comedic path. And it didn't happen. You know, the first comedic film he did was Author in the early 80s, which sadly not many people have seen. I think it's a very difficult film to find, to be honest with you. And I think it's down to licensing more than anything else.
I think I've got it on my watch list. There's a streaming service called Chili that just basically does rent. It doesn't do subscriptions. It just does rental or buy. And I think they're really good for I've watched a lot of Al Pacino, sort of a lot of the, as you say, the more difficult to get, such as Panic in Needle Park, which I let's talk about that as his breakout film, because I watched that last year, and that film shot to the top of my best Al Pacino movies ever list. Yeah. It was it's just, I mean, it's winter in New York. It's that new Hollywood grungy element, depressing subject matter element, and yet this sort of, underneath it all, there's this sort of skeleton of crumbling romanticism. You know, I think you mentioned it, sort of Romeo and Juliet with heroin in your chapter. You know,
how miserable is that? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and I didn't know until I read your chapter on it that it was this sort of like groundbreaking film in terms of the depiction of heroin use as well.
Yeah, it's such an interesting film. I was lucky enough to do an introduction to that film here in the UK a few years ago, because it doesn't get screened anywhere. That's the thing. It's very difficult to screen it. Nobody really knows who's got the rights to it theatrically. Obviously, DVD and Blu-ray, it seems to get re-released, and as you said, it's on streaming service with yourself. But it is such an interesting film in Pacino's career, because it was the one that, it didn't launch him, let's be honest. It was The Godfather that launched him, but it's the film that started him on the path that he's still on to this day. And what we need to remember about this film is that actually he came out second best in this film. Yes. You watch this film, you're like, Kitty Wynn is amazing in this film. Absolutely amazing. She acts Pacino off the screen. But Kitty Wynn, well, her career basically nosedived after, The Exorcist, I would say. And she left the entire industry for decades. And then she tried to come back. I think, from vague recollection, she tried to get back in touch with Pacino. I was like, can I come and do another film with you? And he was like, well, I'm not sure. Listen, it's not up to me. But her performance opposite Pacino in this one, I have to say, is one of the few times where somebody does get the better of him, especially early in his career as well. And I think Jerry Schatzberg, the director, knew that and played up to it. And he already knew what he'd got with Pacino, because he'd seen him on stage and he was like, that's the guy who I want. There's nobody else I want at all. It's just Pacino. And I think he knew that actually if he keeps Pacino on the reins, so to speak, you're going to get a better performance from him as this drug-addicted loner who really only has one friend, and it's his girlfriend, who's kind of on and off, and they're really only together because of the drugs as well. And I think holding him back gave a better performance for him, and it certainly showed Coppola, and obviously it certainly showed the Paramount executives, that actually, you know what, for a character like Michael Corleone, we need restraint. We need somebody. We don't need Sonny. We don't need somebody who's going to come in and do Sonny. We need somebody who's going to have that slow growth as a character through The Godfather. And I think that's what you get in Panic in Needle Park. It's one of those performances where you go, okay, well, Pacino's doing very well here, but he's being out-acted by Kitty Wynn. But then you watch it again, you realize, actually, do you know what? He's holding back all the time. I interviewed Paul Calderon, because he was in Sea of Love with Pacino, and he said, there was one day where I was on set and the producer's son, Michael Bregman, said to him, just come here. He said, I'm going to show you what Pacino does. He said, so they stood next to the camera, and he said, watch what he does. He said, he doesn't do anything, and yet he comes out looking the best ever. And he said, I just stood there next to the camera, and he said, I noticed Pacino wasn't doing anything. He didn't have any lines. He just wasn't there. But he was allowing his thoughts to push the scene. And you're like, there's not many actors who would do something like that. There's not many actors these days who are method actors. And I think when you have somebody like that who is able to influence a scene just by sitting there, you've got a special actor. Obviously, I'm biased on this one, John. I really am biased, but I think that goes back to the Panic in Needle Park, is that you have him just sat there, just looking around. Or the moment in the film where he's playing handball as well. You kind of think it's a little fun moment, but it gives you a glimpse into who this character is and how he sort of lives his life day to day.
Yeah, I think the most devastating moment in that movie is a reaction shot. There's a scene where he realizes his girlfriend has taken drugs for the first time, and his face just collapses, and she says something like, "Oh, I wanted to be with you. I want to share this with you," and his face just, it's like, oh no, what have you done?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that as well, because I am a massive fan of the TV show The Wire.
Right,
and there is a direct parallel between Panic in Needle Park and the scenes in season 3 of Amsterdam, where the police have pushed all the drug dealers and the drug takers into that one area away from everybody. It feels like that. It really does. We're talking about a TV show that was made 30 years or something after Panic in Needle Park, but you still get that reaction, as you said, when you see somebody and they go, "Oh, what have you done?" You get that in The Wire. You get it with Bubbles, and you get it with a few of the other characters, and you get it in Panic in Needle Park. As you said, you see it and you go, you feel heartbroken, but they're doing something illegal, which is not good for them. But at the same time, you just feel so sad that she has done that on her own, and yet he wanted to do it with her. I think that's the interesting thing in that film, is that you have this relationship where they want to be together, but the dragon of drugs just won't let them be, because they're so desperate. They're so desperate, and Pacino's character is holding back. That's the thing, he's really trying to hold back, because he realizes this is not going anywhere. The only way this is out is either we get clean or we die, basically. And neither character looks like they can ever get clean. And I think that's the sadness in the film. It's not a happy film, is it? Let's be honest.
No, absolutely. It keys into that. I mean, Joan Didion and her husband, John Dunn, again, I think you quote it in your book where she says, I thought we didn't do it. It wasn't hard enough. And then I watched it sort of years later and thought, wow, it was way harder than I thought we would be allowed to do it. Okay, let's move to because I want to go through some of these films, especially the ones that are maybe a little bit less spoken about, and so it'd be an opportunity as well for our listeners to sort of build up a watch list of stuff they might not have seen. But we can't pass over Michael Corleone totally. Did you sort of learn something new when you were writing that chapter on The Godfather? Because you said previously it wasn't a film you particularly loved. It was just a film that was sort of there.
I learned something new every time I watch The Godfather. I think that's the beauty of that film. I remember actually that I tell this story quite a bit actually, is that I'd seen The Godfather, and then years later I went back to it and I thought, okay, well, when's Pacino turning up? Because obviously I was used to 90s Pacino and his age, and then the wedding and whatever else, and I'm like, well, when's Pacino turning up? So I had to look on IMDb. I'm like, oh, he's here. Wow, look how young he is. I think that was the thing, is that it kind of shocked me that I was so used to it. There's so much about The Godfather. Other books have been written about it, but it is there's a reason why it's still classed as one of the all-time great films. Not just mob films either, let's be honest. One of the all-time great films is because that it took a pulpy book, let's be honest. Puzo's book is not the film at all. And Coppola turned it into this masterpiece. And you find so many different characters in it. I think that's the beauty of it, is that it's the different characters, the complexities of each one. You kind of are instantly drawn to Sonny because he's the hothead. He's the guy who wants retribution. Oh, God. And then he dies. And you think, okay, this is interesting. Then you have Michael, who, as I'd said earlier, has this slow rise. He's very calculating. Everything is going on. You can see his eyes moving, taking everything in, but he's not saying anything. And you realize, okay, this is the guy you should be afraid of. And it is easily one of the most chilling scenes, I think, in film history, is right at the end, where all of a sudden Kay is stood outside the door. Michael is in there. There's two other people in there. They start to kiss his hand. and Al Neary comes and shuts the door. And in that moment, Kay Corleone knows, okay, I've now married a mobster. And yet at the start of the film, he says, I'm me, I'm not my family. And within 2 hours and 40 something minutes, that change has happened. And suddenly we see a completely different person. And that's when Kay knows, I don't know how to get out of this. And you can see the anguish in her face. And I think it's one of the most amazing scenes ever, but there's no words to it. I think that's the wonderful thing about The Godfather, is that there are so many scenes with no words in it. And, I think it's just one of those things that everybody works so well together. I mean, Coppola had a torrid time making it. Paramount were constantly on his back. But Brando had a great time making it. Brando was classed as the mighty Moon King because he kept mooning people. They had a belt made for him that said Mighty Moon King on it. And I think that's where Pacino really understood the craft, because Brando took him under his wing and showed him method acting and showed him how he can find the character. And then obviously, he'd been at the Actors Studio at that time. And I think for everybody in that film, it did something for their career and still does something for their career, but it gave them a different way of looking at how to do performances. Certainly Pacino, obviously, everything's going on there, and yet nothing is said. I think that's the beauty of it. It's the same with the second. There's always going to be the argument of which one is better. Is it the first or the second? Let's be honest. They're both masterpieces. There's directors out there who would cut off an arm and a leg to make at least Godfather Part 3. Never mind about Part 1 and 2. And I'm a person who'll stick up for Part 3. By the way, I think it's a good film. But I think, that first Godfather film changes everything. It changed everything really in Hollywood as well, didn't it? Let's be honest. The 70s were a big change culturally for films being made in Hollywood. And I think that was one of the big ones. Easy Rider, Raging Bull. Easy Riders as well was one of them. I think it was that era where it would never have been made before. And to have a cast like that as well, a cast of really unknowns.
I rewatched it quite recently, and I watched the whole trilogy because I wanted to watch Godfather Coda, the sort of new cut of The Godfather 3. One thing that always strikes me is how much of a performance that's thought out over the entire film, that he sort of he uses, as you say, shouty Pacino turns up but twice in the two movies. And so when it does, I remember watching Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the recent it's not particularly recent, Thomas Alfredson one with Gary Oldman, and I think that's a really his Smiley is a Pacino performance, because it's quiet, it's totally understated the whole way through, and then he shouts at Colin Firth right at the end. And it knocks you back, because you've just not even known that this rage was in this guy. And yet retrospectively you think, well, of course it was always there. He was, like the Incredible Hulk says, I'm always angry, I'm always holding it back. And the same sort of true of sort of Michael. He's not being calm because he's preternaturally calm. He's being calm because it's an act of discipline,
Yeah. I mean, look at the way he treats his brother, and he realizes that it's his brother that has double-crossed him. Anybody else would have gone full guns blazing, let's be honest. Instead, he goes up, he kisses him, he tells him it was him, and then his brother runs. But he doesn't get too far. He comes back, and then they have that sit down. Well, Pacino stood up, and his brother sat down, and then it all ends on the lake. It's not a violent scene, and yet it should be, because the family have been betrayed. And if somebody like Sonny was in charge, it would have been all guns blazing. But Michael's a methodical person every step of the way, apart from in Part 3, obviously, where he loses it. And I think that's the interesting thing about Part 3, is that we have a redemption of, a mob boss, which obviously we see a lot now. Let's be honest, The Sopranos really kind of kicked that into gear a little bit. But at that time, we'd never seen that. Everybody just wanted mob bosses to kill people. And then they turn around and they go, right, we're going to do Godfather Part 3. And everybody's like, great, fantastic. And actually what's going to happen is Michael Corleone is going to try and repent his sins. And the way he's going to do that is he's going to go to the Vatican and try and help them out with money. And I think at the time when Part 3 came out, people were like, this is not the film we were expecting. and it didn't. I mean, it did big business. It did okay. You know, it got award nominated, but I think a lot of people were disappointed. But you look back at it now and you're like, but the Immobiliare story, the Vatican story, is happening now in real life. That's the thing. It's one of those stories that's constantly happening now. So part 3, to a certain degree, is ahead of its time. I think a lot of people have got a problem with it, with certain actors being in it. I don't, to be honest with you. But you know, that's a whole other podcast here, John. Really,
Sure,
talking about.
Sure.
But you wanted to talk about other films.
Yeah. No, I mean, the only thing I'd say in terms of the Sopranos link, Godfather Part 3 is the Godfather that they quote interminably. That's the one they're constantly referring to. You know, it's a little. I mean, that's a clever thing about the Sopranos, is they always have a relationship with cinema, but it always hits you at an unexpected angle. So when Martin Scorsese turns up in, I think it may even be the first episode, Christopher shouts, "Come done!" I love it. You know, it's not like Goodfellas or Casino. It's Come Done that is his favorite Scorsese movie. I liked it, he says. Okay, yeah, let's go on to some of those lesser known Pacino performances, and then we'll come back to some of the big hitters a little bit later. But Scarecrow he does with Gene Hackman, and I think that's one of the lesser seen. And again, I watched that and thought, this film should be right at the top of the top 5. It's so good, and 2 amazing performances as well.
Gene Hackman rates that as the best film he's ever made.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. You're right. It is lesser seen. It's sadly lesser seen as well. It's a comedy road trip. Let's be honest. It's 2 opposites who find solace in each other.
It's a little bit Midnight Cowboy, isn't it? It has that. I wonder if that sort of stole its thunder a little bit.
It's also a bit Thunderbolt and Lightfoot,
right?
As well.
Yeah.
But it's got, going back to Pacino being the comedian. There's comedic moments in that, where they're talking about the Scarecrow, or where Gene Hackman's character rings him up, he pretends to call him up, basically. And then when they meet the 2 women who they try to go to bed with, and it doesn't really work out for Pacino's character and everything. There's a lot of fun in this movie. And sadly, not a lot of people have seen it. And, Jerry Schatzberg, again, who directed Panic in Needle Park, really got the best out of both of them. But Hackman and Pacino hated each other on that film.
Really?
Absolutely detested each other, because Hackman would show up on set half an hour before. He was very much, these are the lines, I'm going to say the lines. That was it. Pacino would float onto set an hour afterwards or something, and he'd sort of know the lines but not really know the lines, and it was kind of like, hey, maybe if I improvise, and when you have one who's improvising and one who's really sticking to the lines, it's not going to go well.
No.
So it didn't work out very well for them at any point, but you don't see that on the film. That's the thing. On the film, you think these 2 are such wonderful characters, such colorful characters. And I think that's the great thing about certainly writing the book, is that I found out that they didn't like each other. And you watch the film, you're like, how can they not like each other? It looks like they're having an absolute blast going across America, until obviously the sadly depressing ending, which is just it's a bolt out the blue, isn't it? And you think, how do you leave a film like that? And that's literally what happens, is the film just ends. And you go, what? Well, we need to know. And Jerry Schatzberg's written a sequel. He wrote a sequel about 15 years ago, and Pacino's interested, but Hackman won't do it because obviously he's retired. And he said, I'm not doing it unless we have both people back. I'm not going to do son of Gene Hackman's character or something like this. It just wouldn't work. So he has this script ready for whatever it would be called, Scarecrow 2. I can't imagine it would be called that, because there's a horror film called that. But yeah, that's such a brilliant film. I agree with you. It should always be top 5, top 7 Pacino, and sadly not many people have seen it. So I mean, high recommendation for that. You are right to pick that one out.
So you have you have the Lumet collaborations, which Dog Day Afternoon, and what's the other one? Serpico. Oh no, I'm thinking, is it maybe Norman Jewison who does the courtroom drama one?
Oh, and Justice for All.
And Justice for All, yes, So the 2 Lumets are staggering as well, but I mean, I think they're rightly celebrated and quite visible,
Yes, yeah. I think the easy thing to say is that Pacino loved working with Lumet, because Lumet gave him time to rehearse. If you wanted 3 months, you got 3 months, And you see interviews with Pacino now where he's like, you don't get time to rehearse. He said, that's what I loved working with Lumet, is that we got time to rehearse. And that doesn't happen now. Obviously, I know you want to move on to some of the lesser ones, but I'll tell you an interesting story about Dog Day Afternoon, is that Frank Pearson, the guy who wrote it, was working with Pacino in pre-production. And there was initially in the script a scene where Pacino's character would kiss his lover, not his wife, but his lover, played by Chris Sarandon. And they were workshopping it. And Pacino turned around to Chris Pearson and said, I'm not doing this. Frank Pearson. And Frank Pearson said, well, it's in the script. He said, no, I'm not doing it. He said, no, I'm not kissing this. I'm not kissing my lover. No, no. And that was the end of the conversation. And then about 3 weeks went by. They hadn't seen each other. And Pacino called up Pearson and said, well, are you getting rid of me? Are you firing me or something? He said, no, why would we do that? He said, we still want you to do the thing. He said, but why won't you do the kiss? Is it because you don't want to kiss a man? And he said, no, it's nothing to do with that. He said, the problem would be is if I kiss Chris Sarandon, that's all anybody's ever going to talk about with that film. And those characters and that film is so much more than just a male kiss. And I think that tells you everything about it, is that he would rather turn around and say, actually, this character has a whole, closeted homosexual life going on. And if you get that kiss, you kind of get that release. Whereas in the film, you don't get that release at all.
Yeah. I mean, that's an argument that you could say went on right into the 80s and 90s with films like Philadelphia, where they were tamped down any explicit sort of, I mean, and by explicit, I mean even rudimentary portrait of gay sexuality. So he has Lumet, he has his Serpico, and he has his Dog Day Afternoon, and they're nailed on classics. Yeah. And then he's also doing some other films around there which are sort of less seen, less successful, perhaps, like Bobby Deerfield is one that it's so of its time watching it now. For some reason, watching it now, it sort of epitomizes that sort of late 70s, early 80s, well, I think it's late 70s, sort of aftershave advert aesthetic. That it's just like people driving a lot and in mountains and wearing brilliant clothes and great glasses, eyewear, and kind of quite enigmatic. And there was also this bunch of movies about like car racing as well, which James Garner had Grand Prix and Steve McQueen had Le Mans, and
Bobby Deerfield didn't really hit the heights, and I think
but I mean, it's a really worthwhile film. I really like. I mean, I'm not being critical of it, saying that it's like an aftershave advert, but it's kind of a really good aftershave advert.
It is. I completely agree. And the thing is, let's face it, is that by the end of the 70s, Pacino was heartthrob #1 across the world.
Right.
And all he'd done was smolder in a very smart 3-piece suit in The Godfather. Nobody had seen him do an aftershave advert, as you said.
Right.
So I think part of this was, well, let's get him in some sexy clothes. Let's do his hair in some sort of bouffant or something like that. Let's get him having a romance with somebody. Let's have him playing a race car driver, because that's a sexy job as well. You're right. It is very much of its time. It's not the best Pacino performance, I have to say. He's quite moody all the way through it, in a sort of, I don't know if he gets the character that much. Yeah, it's an interesting film. Sadly, still unreleased here in the UK. It's owned by Warner Brothers. They just won't release it. I don't really understand why. It's available all other territories. People put out some really good Blu-rays on it. But I just wonder if it's because it's that film. At the end of the 70s, you go, yes, look what he did. The Godfathers and Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon and Panic in Needle Park. And he did Bobby Deerfield. But don't mention Bobby Deerfield. Yeah, it's a curious film. It really is. You're right. It's of its time. If you had it as a double bill with Grand Prix, I think you'd be fine. But it's, the fact that he's trying to romance this woman who is suicidal isn't the most uplifting stories either.
Bit creepy, isn't it?
That's exactly the right word. Creepy. Yes, it is a bit creepy. Yeah, you're right. Yes.
I think it's one of those contradictions that you sometimes have. It happens a lot in literature as well, where people sort of purposefully say, the reason this character is two-dimensional is because I'm talking about an absence of effect. I'm talking about a sort of empty subject. And then you sort of go, yeah, but it just looks like a two-dimensional character. It's like I get it that you did it intentionally, but he's supposed to be a boring person. That's why he's a boring person, and it's but it leaves me feeling a bit empty watching it. But then he goes on. And Justice for All, I'm going to skip over because that's on my watch list. I haven't seen yet.
Great film, really good film. A lot of comedy in it, really interesting cast as well. Thomas Waits is in that, who I'm pleased to say I interviewed for the book and has stayed a friend. Most people will know him from The Warriors. And he went on to work with Pacino on the stage as well. So, I mean, he'd got loads of stories to tell me. I mean, it could have filled a book on its own, to be honest with you, John. I mean, he got so many. But it's an interesting film, kind of funny, kind of not. It doesn't know where it should be placed. I think that's the interesting thing about it.
Well, that's definitely on my watch list. Cruising with Friedkin.
Ooh.
I mean, now this is. I mean, it depends a little bit what there are. I think there are several cuts of this floating around as well. But I watched one of the most recent sort of Blu-ray. I think this is a really underrated film. I know it got a lot of stick at the time for being homophobic and aligning the gay community with sort of sleazy look from outside sort of thing. But I in a way, I sort of think its time has come. I think if you look at it and you don't see the gay community as being so much besieged as I imagine they felt very much in 1980, you can just kind of enjoy it as a glimpse of this culture that was there.
See, I've written in the book, I don't like the film. I do find it seedy. I do find it quite disgusting. It doesn't work for Pacino. Pacino wanted to work with Friedkin. Friedkin wanted to work with Pacino. It just didn't work for them. In fact, they fell out quite badly. They just didn't work together that well. It's interesting. I do agree with you that it has sort of come of age now. I think it has been reassessed, and a lot of people are finding something interesting in it. I did a screening of it in London a couple of years ago. It was for, forgive me to the people who are listening who were there. It was for some sort of, I'm trying to think now. It was like a bondage festival or something like that.
Okay.
Okay. And obviously they wanted to show that. And it hadn't been shown on the big screen for about 4 or 5 years. So they asked me to come down and talk about it, but a lot of people in that cinema had not seen that film, and they had somebody come on stage with us as well and ask them what they thought to it, and they said, "I just don't understand why it finishes like it is. Like, who is the killer?" And I'm like, well, that's part of it, is that nobody really knows. It's meant to keep you in suspense, but really, it doesn't work that well, I don't think.
He's trying to repeat the French Connection sort of
ambiguous
ending. I mean, there are different things there are different types of ambiguity. There's a sort of Christopher Nolan at the end of Inception type, where he's just like, well, just leave the camera running another few minutes and we'll be absolutely certain. You've just skipped something that otherwise we would know exactly, what it is. And there's the ambiguity that's sort of like in the DNA of the thing. So, Rashomon, there's no way of knowing who's telling the right story.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people who have only just come to it are not a fan of. But then, as you said, a lot of people are kind of finding something interesting about it as well. I will say this, is that it didn't work out for Pacino. I mean, he only spoke about the film once.
Right.
That was a few lines when he was interviewed. I think it was for Variety around the film's release. But he did put £1 million in a bond, and all of the interest would go towards LGBTQ societies, and that's still going to this day.
Right. I just think, honestly, thought experiment, put this film in French and subtitle it, and it would be raved about. And all of those issues wouldn't necessarily disappear, but I think there was a lot of animosity towards Friedkin at the time, so I think he was ready for a fall. I agree with you. I don't think the film works totally, and it certainly goes a long way to alienating a lot of the people who would normally be going to see Al Pacino in a cop movie.
But can you imagine?
That's kind of what makes it brilliant.
I guess so. Yeah.
I like that punkish sort of attitude.
I had met somebody at a screening who told me that their mum was a huge Al Pacino fan, and they took them to see their first Al Pacino film, and it was Cruising.
Oh, my word.
Because they didn't know. They were just like, hey, it's Al Pacino in leather. Ooh, saucy.
This is going to be great.
And then, so it was the mum and the daughter, and you were like, I don't think this is the film for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, she always remembered it. I'm trying to think who it was. It was somebody who told me. I thought it was hilarious, really.
When you go to see films, the context is really interesting. I remember seeing Brokeback Mountain in a multiplex in Italy, and it was packed because it was a lot of girls with their boyfriends going to see Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger, and the discomfort crackling through that cinema was really fascinating. But obviously everyone stayed till the end and everybody watched it. There wasn't, but it does make you sort of think, well, that picture would have had a huge influence because that it does.
Yep.
Those people were confronted for the first time with well, I'm not saying all of them, obviously, because there's probably a large section of the audience that were perfectly comfortable with that, but some of them were being confronted with something that they really weren't comfortable in seeing or appreciating.
I completely agree with you, and I think that's going back to it. I think that is part of the brilliance of Pacino, is that he actually makes some of these films that confront a lot of people's their thoughts that they already have about certain characters. You've only got to look at Scarface. I mean, we can gloss over Scarface, so much has been said about it anyway, but when you have somebody come in like that, especially at that time in America as well, and all of a sudden Americans are rooting for an immigrant because he's wanting to live the American dream. Suddenly you think, hang on, here I am shouting to keep the immigrants out, and yet at the same time I'm shouting because Al Pacino is playing an immigrant and I want him to succeed because he's killing people with guns and taking copious amounts of drugs and gets all the women. There's that interesting quandary there, I think, that Pacino is playing some of these characters who you should hate. You absolutely hate.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
And yet he makes them not likable. I won't say likable, but he makes you appreciate them.
Oh, definitely. I think he definitely had, because I know it's that dichotomy. He's definitely a serious actor and he's definitely a movie star. So when the serious actor in him wants to do something serious, he's bringing the movie star along with him anyway.
Yes.
And therein lies a lot of the sort of ambiguity around Scarface. One thing this is a theory I have, and like many of my theories, it probably doesn't make much sense, but I always think in a great movie star's career, there is one role that kind of makes and breaks them at the same time. So with Jack Nicholson, it would be Jack Torrance in The Shining. Maybe even One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where they do something so well, he becomes Mad Jack, and therein you get the Joker and you get his sort of off-screen persona. With Pacino, I think Scarface is that role which sort of is in danger of sort of breaking him as an actor, because he just becomes this other iconic figure. What do you think of that as a theory?
I would agree with you.
Yay.
I genuinely would. We've been just talking about some of his great performances: Serpico, Michael Corleone, Dog Day Afternoon, and we can list more as well. Insider as well, something like that. But I do think he is overwhelmed by Scarface, the amount of people that love that film, and to this day still love that film. Rightly so. Listen, I'm not a huge lover of it. I think it's a good film, not a huge lover of it. But I do think it is the film that somebody goes to see a Pacino film and they think, it's okay, Scarface is here. And you think, no. At no point is Scarface turning up in Danny Collins. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's just not happening. But I do agree with you. And it's a really good point that you make, that actually maybe actors are made and broken with one film, and that's all they do. You go to Comic-Cons, I do anyway.
Right.
and you see these actors, and the majority of stuff they're signing is from probably 1 or 2 films all the time. And you think they probably just sit there and go, yeah. And they go, oh, this film changed my life. And they think, oh, another person who's, tells me this and whatever else. Yeah. I think the good thing is that Pacino has never backed away from Scarface. He's always seen it as, a pivotal moment in his career. He always goes to the reunions when they do it as well. I think they did a 30-year anniversary reunion a few years ago, so everybody was there for that. I think that's the good thing, is that he realized that this film did get him back on top. Let's be honest. He fought for it because it was meant to be De Niro and Scorsese making this film.
Right.
And then that fell apart. Pacino saw the original version, called up his manager, producer, Marty Bregman, and said, we've got to do Scarface. We've got to do it. And then obviously Oliver Stone came in and wrote it. And then, De Palma came in and directed it. And, let's be honest, directed the shit out of it as an action film.
Yeah,
I mean, my goodness, there's people out there who have not seen this film who still know quotes from it.
Yeah.
And I think that's when you have a legacy of a film that, you're right, yeah, it makes you and it breaks you. I think that's the thing. But yeah, here we are talking about Scarface, and I'm like, yeah, we can gloss over it all the time.
Well, let's talk about Revolution. That's a film I haven't seen. That's a film that is on my watch list. Should I watch that one?
You should watch the director's cut.
Ah, okay.
So Revolution, made in the 1980s here in the UK. Pacino comes over. He's on stage in the evening in the West End, doing Huey. During the day, he's going to King's Lynn. For anybody who doesn't know where King's Lynn is, it's in Norfolk. It is a small town, but it looks like American Revolution era. It's kind of weird. So Pacino would travel from London to King's Lynn, which is about 2.5 hours every single day, to do this film. It was a miserable experience because it was Goldcrest Films who were running out of money because they were making Revolution, and at the same time they were making The Mission with De Niro. It's a film that really, well, Pacino didn't make a film for 4 years after it.
Yeah, it kind of screwed him up.
Yeah, it did. But I think there was a lot of things going on. Pacino was obviously stretching himself too much. He got pneumonia as well because they were filming in the rain quite a lot. He didn't really get on with a few co-stars either. He got on with some others. It's kind of one of those weird mixes that if you watch the original, you're like, this is a terrible film. And I write that in the book, is that, this is not a good film. It's a mess. But Warner Brothers, years later, Warner Brothers stumped up some cash to go back and basically allow Pacino and Hugh Hudson to create this director's cut with a narration over it, because that's what Hugh Hudson had always wanted. He wanted a narration over the top of it, and the original film doesn't have it. And they went back and they made such a completely different film. When people talk about when you make a film and then you get the director's cut and how different it is, and there's not many films where the director's cut is vastly different and vastly superior. I'm kind of thinking maybe Kingdom of Heaven is one of those films.
Yeah, he still keeps Orlando Bloom, so just there's a limit to how much you can polish that particular.
Valid point. That's what happened with this, is that here in the UK the BFI put it out. Around the world I think it was Warner's. Very different film. There's still problems with it, don't get me wrong, but it's a much better film. And with the narration is done by Pacino at that time, who was probably, I would say he was probably in his late 60s, something like that. So the grizzled elder statesman narration works better now than if he had been doing it when the film came out, basically, when he got a bit of a high-pitched voice. Yeah, it's a film that I think probably doesn't work for Americans, but actually works for the Brits, because it's all filmed here and you kind of go, oh, well, that just looks like the road down, the street down the road or something. It is a curious piece, I will say that. I mean, I made a special trip to King's Lynn to take photos of where they shot it, and it still looks the same. Like nothing has changed at all.
That's where Annie Lennox was shooting.
But that's what it was. Like I had these stills and I'm like, that's where Annie Lennox told Pacino to get lost. And, this is where there was just loads of bits where I'm like, this looks exactly the same. Yeah, it's an interesting film. I will stick up for the director's cut. I will not stick up for the original, which is on TV here in the UK about once a week, because obviously it's the cheap version.
Cheap Channel 5 sort of favorite. So he goes away, he goes back to the theater and renounces cinema for 4 years, comes back with Sea of Love, which I think is kind of a bit of a forgotten movie now. It's a little bit, it was in a wave of sort of the erotic thriller, 9.5 weeks, sort of Fatal Attraction, that sort of thing. Then he does The Local Stigmatic, which he directs as well, I think.
Yeah. Okay. This is one of those films that never got released here in the
You
UK.
mentioned it earlier that it was a really, I mean, I think I've seen him talk about it and him say that it was almost like it was a film he didn't necessarily want people to see because it was sort of such a personal project.
Yes.
And he would show it to friends and not
Yes.
necessarily.
That's exactly right. Yeah, he didn't really want to put it out, but years later, obviously, somebody came with some money and said, if we put out Local Stigmatic, Chinese Coffee, and Looking for Richard in a box set, can we do it? And that's where it started. It's a film that is barely an hour. It's quite a nihilistic film as well. Whereas Chinese Coffee is a play. You know, it's him and Jerry Orbach. This is Chinese Coffee, just really going at each other. And it has Pacino doing an English accent, and it is the worst English accent you've ever. I mean, Dick Van Dyke would be screwing at how bad Pacino's English accent in it is. It's so bad.
There we go a little bit again with that sort of serious actor / movie star thing, is that there are parts of his technical craft which I just don't think are his strong points. And so doing accents is definitely not one of the, there are other actors who, like Daniel Day-Lewis, who he's craft-wise, he's absolutely, everybody gets distracted with the method bullshit, but just in terms of his craft, he knows how to do an accent and how to hold a character. And The Local Stigmatic I've watched, and it is barely watchable because of the accent, because you're wow, you're just constantly stopping yourself from.
It's bad. Yeah. I mean, if for anybody who hasn't seen the film, there are clips on YouTube that you can watch just of the accent. And I don't think you'll last the 5-minute clip. I'll be honest. You're right. It's bad. It's barely watchable.
I can't remember if I watched the whole thing. And as you say, it is only an hour. So I tell you what I think I did. I think I put it on, started watching it, and then sort of went and made lunch or something while it was still on. Just with the sort of, my body decided, okay, brain, you got to decide what to put on. Now I'm going to go and make lunch. So we go to, then he's picking up sort of, in a sense, he's really, because I remember when he came back in Sea of Love, and I remember thinking, wow, he's physically changed. There's a real split between young Pacino and the second part of his career, really.
Yeah, fiery Pacino, I think, is what we could start with Sea of Love. Let's be honest, Sea of Love, he's smouldering in it, romance, not even romancing, trying to romance Ellen Barkin, who is equally as sexy in that film. Damn, that film is incredibly sexy.
Sure.
The sex scene in the bedroom where the rain is at the window and whatever else. Okay, now you look at it and you're like, it's a bit of a joke, it's a bit of a cliche. But at the time, it wasn't. Erotic thrillers were huge. But yeah, you're right. He came back and he looked very different. He looked like he had chiseled himself up. He was like, right, I'm now an adult actor who is going to go out and find very different roles.
Yeah, he's definitely not a sex symbol anymore, is he? I mean, even he makes that sexy film, but it's kind of almost like this. There's the incongruity of this, slightly past the hill geezer. He does the same again in Frankie and Johnny, where it's sort of like they're very self-consciously not two young lovebirds.
They're both broken people, basically. And I think because they're both broken, they find solace in each other. It's not that they mend each other. It's just that they realize both of us are broken, and maybe being together will help us. That's a lovely film. I really like that film. It's so tender. And going back to it, Pacino's funny in it. Really funny in it. Yeah. And Michelle Pfeiffer is funny in it as well. It's sadly underappreciated, I think, that one.
And then even when you get him doing his sort of, he gets bit roles in, well, more than bit roles in Dick Tracy.
I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, let's be honest, that performance is the start of the outlandish Pacino, the shouty Pacino, let's be honest. But that's what Big Boy Caprice in the comics and in the Dick Tracy TV shows was like.
Yeah.
So it made sense that you would have somebody like Pacino. Now, obviously, we look back and we're like, yeah, of course. But, he really pushed for that role, really pushed for it, and went through so many makeup tests and everything else like that. Madonna was scared of him as well.
How come?
Because he was just so ferocious.
Right.
And when he would put the latex on and everything, he became Big Boy Caprice. Madonna was scared of him as well. And I love that story about it, that Madonna, is scared of Pacino like that. Yeah. But he loved that. And also, let's not forget, we still talk about superhero comic book movies being nominated for Oscars. Pacino's Big Boy Caprice performance was the first comic book character nominated for an Oscar.
I think people forget Dick Tracy, it was a big success at the time, but I think because it wasn't Batman, it didn't, and it didn't have sequels. I don't know.
I think because it was much more adult and the way it looked, it's beautifully shot. The way that the nightlight and all of the colors so stand out beautifully. But, Beatty's treated it like shit. Let's be honest. It's a bare bones DVD and Blu-ray. He's done nothing else. He still owns the copyright for it. He won't do anything for it. He won't relinquish it. And I think that's part of the problem is that when you have a celebrated filmmaker like Warren Beatty, who made a film like this, he was after it as well. He wanted to do it. And then he's just like, yeah, well, whatever, we're just going to throw it away. A lot of people forget about it. And it's a shame because it's got a great cast. Let's be honest, Dustin Hoffman's in there, who is Pacino's arch rival for decades. It's such a great film. It really is. It's good fun. It's a good adult comic book movie with a cracking Pacino performance.
And talking about arch rivals, one of my favorite roles in this period from him is Glengarry Glen Ross, because he just walks into a room full of like great actors. You got Alan Arkin, you got Kevin Spacey, okay, great actor despite everything. Jack Lemmon, of course, and Al Pacino walks in and just owns the room. Just absolutely. Yeah. He's not, he's maybe not even. He's not even in the Alec Baldwin scene. And yet he doesn't need to be, because he's such a powerful character that if he was in that scene wouldn't be credible anymore, because he would not take that shit,
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. That is an actor's film, isn't it? Let's be honest. That is actors in a room. I saw it on the stage a few years ago, and Christian Slater played the role that Pacino played. And, you have to have a certain attitude. You have to have big balls to play that role. Let's be honest. It's all well and good doing the Alec Baldwin role, but it's 10 minutes. But you have to have big balls to play Ricky Roma. And Pacino comes in, suave suit, knocks the shit out of everybody else, let's be honest, disappears for ages. And then you get caught up in Jack Lemmon's story. And then all of a sudden there becomes this really nice story where it's the hotshot Ricky Roma trying to help the elder statesman who had helped him when he'd turned up and everything. It is a brilliant film. It's an actor's film. Pacino loved working on that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I'd found a quote that said when it was his last day and he got to give a speech, he ended up crying.
Right.
Because he loved working on it so much, because there was so much dialogue than anything. He loved the dialogue, and he still does love the dialogue. Everything's on the page. I think that's the great thing, And
there's such great swearing in that. I remember watching it at the cinema, and you don't use the C word very often. You don't hear the C word coming out of an actor's mouth in a Hollywood movie very often. And he fucking rips into that word with such, oh man, it's poetry. I know it's David Mamet, so what else do you expect? But I think it's the height of David Mamet. I think it's the best thing he ever did. And I think it's
interesting you say, I think Mamet, there is a certain beat to Mamet's work.
Sure.
And I think you either get it or you don't get it. I've seen other works of Mamet. You've only got to think that obviously Mamet wrote Phil Spector with Pacino and Helen Mirren.
Yeah. And
I think it can be difficult for actors to get those beats, to get that flowing right. But when you find that dialogue, because it is heavy dialogue, let's be honest, it's a lot without much movement. When you do find it, you're right. All of a sudden, you're just bowled over by brilliant acting. Whoever it is, Jack Lemmon's fantastic in it as well. The whole cast is amazing. Let's be honest. But yeah, it's a film that people do bring up occasionally, but not enough.
I think I think it has a certain. I mean, it's a film stage play, so it has there's an element of you've sort of got to go with that, and it's got certain unities that aren't very common in movies generally. Yeah. But yeah, it knocks me. I remember seeing it at the cinema; it blew me away, and I've rewatched it several times, and every time, it's so good. Going into sort of a later period, you've got him in. I mean, Carlito's Way is coming back with the. I think I might even prefer Carlito's Way to Scarface.
Do you know how many people tell me that? So many people tell me that, and I think it's because it's interesting.
I'm just a sheep.
But I write it in the book as well. Right, is that listen? I like Scarface, but I think Carlito's Way is once again, it's a gangster trying to go straight. He's done bad things, but he just wants to fall in love. That's all it is. He just wants to fall in love, and you kind of get that. And I do agree with you. I think Carlito's Way is a better film because it's not as big. Scarface is this big, frenetic piece of work, whereas Carlito's Way, granted, there's that amazing chase sequence. Let's be honest. I mean, God, people have been ripping off that bloody chase sequence for decades now, haven't they? But I think it's just much more intelligent. I think the characters are much better. I think that's the great thing about it.
I love Sean Penn in it. I think it was Sean Penn actually doing a real character. And I think you had the beginning of Sean Penn as a character actor rather than as Sean Penn, Mr. Madonna,
Yes.
The Insider, I think, he had a couple of films with Michael Mann. He does The Insider, which when he's working with Michael Mann, he seems to take on this sort of quite generous role of being something of a foil to another actor. I'm not sure how he would view it, but I don't think there's anything in The Insider where you're not thinking this is actually Russell Crowe's film and I'm just framing it. And similarly with Heat, okay, I'm the guy who's going to get him in the end, but this is really De Niro's journey. Do you think that's true?
I just think once again he liked working with Michael Mann. I think he found the new Lumet.
Right.
Really. Right. I think the fact that he got time to rehearse to find the character. The Insider for me is an amazing piece of work, and for somebody who has no idea about that story either. So when when I saw it, I'm like, I don't know who these people are. Because we didn't get that here in the UK. We had no idea who these people were. So all you knew was this is an expose movie. That's all it was.
60 minutes. What's that? It's like Panorama.
It's
like World in Action.
That's it. Exactly. Yes. You're right in that. I think probably you look at it and you go, well, they're head to head in terms of the amount of screen time and names, but really he is playing second fiddle a little bit in both films. But The Insider is just a magnificent performance, really. And it comes at the end of that period where he was doing a lot of shouty stuff, and he doesn't shout in The Insider. In fact, he's the guy who's really put upon because he wants to do right by Russell Crowe's character, but he's being blocked every turn because of politics in the office and how big that TV show is.
Yeah, I mean he's the fixer for Christopher Plummer's character. He's not even in his workplace. He's not the guy turning up saying I'm a producer on 60 Minutes and I'm the star. He's like, no, there's another star who I've got to. I love the bit at the very beginning where he's interviewing some sort of terrorist character. And he starts arguing with the people, and then Pacino goes up to him and says, "Are you warmed up now? Are you ready to go?" It's like, "Yeah, I'm ready to go." And it's just that, it could in another film, it could so easily be the other way around in terms of the roles. Pacino could easily be playing the Christopher Plummer character, and I think it's more interesting because he isn't.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, I like the fact that Pacino is like, well, I'm going to take this character and I think I can find something here without taking it to those proportions, because you don't want the same type of person, because Christopher Plummer's playing that character, so you don't want an outlandish producer, even though probably that was the case. I don't know, but yeah, to be quite reserved in that film. I think we said this earlier, him being reserved in certain films, and I think that shows it there as well. I think it showed that by the end of the 90s, he'd become this completely different actor, and he'd found other ways of performing that weren't outlandish and actually were very different performances all over the place. You look at that, and then the next film that comes out is Any Given Sunday,
Right.
And you're like, they're polar opposites, aren't
Yeah,
they?
absolutely. Back with Oliver Stone as well from
Back
Scarface.
with Oliver Stone, yeah, huge ensemble piece. It's macho to the hilt. I mean, you watch it and you can just smell and taste the testosterone coming off the screen.
I don't want to taste it. Oh, the jock straps in
that movie. But that's what it's like. If Cameron Diaz wasn't in that film, it would be the ultimate macho male 90s sports movie. Let's be honest. I mean, it's so close to it anyway. But it is outlandish. It is garish and whatever else. But it's Oliver Stone, and that's what he does right sometimes. And he writes it well. You can't disagree with that.
Yeah, and he's visually he's got a brilliant DP who, I mean, I think he's Tarantino's DP now. And all his movies look amazing. JFK and Natural Born Killers. If anything, they sometimes look too amazing. So he goes into this really productive period. And I think you're right. He's definitely changed his style of acting. And there's a couple of good videos on YouTube of impersonators going through his career and sort of going, oh, you've got the really quiet Pacino, and then you've got the slightly loud and then the shoutier. But at this point, he's really playing sort of guru as well to a lot of younger actors. He's playing like Keanu Reeves in Devil's Advocate, Colin Farrell in, what's it called?
The Recruit.
Yeah. But those films, I mean, they're okay. I don't mind them, but they're not. I don't think there's much going on there that needs a Pacino necessarily.
They're straight to DVD fodder. Let's be honest. Two for the money is the same sort of thing.
Right.
You're right. They're perfectly fine. They're not offending anybody. It's a decent cast, but you're not getting too much from the performance. It feels like Pacino's just turning up and like, yeah, just let me go and I'll do whatever else,
Okay, I'm going to go for a few of the later ones, and you're just going to tell me whether because I'll skip the ones I've seen, because I just want to know which ones I should, for the completist, I should watch. Okay, so 88 Minutes. I haven't seen that.
88 Minutes, a film that is meant to be real time, but actually it's 102 minutes runtime.
Yeah. So it should have been called 102 Minutes. So from that, I'm getting no, don't bother with it.
Awful film.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I've heard as much. Ocean 13, I've seen. Righteous Kill, I've never seen.
It's not great.
No, okay.
It's I mean, Pacino.
It's a twofer as well. I would get to go for my De Niro completist as well.
Yeah, but you really have to want to see it. It's the dialogue. The dialogue is really shonky.
Right. Okay. Oh dear. You don't know Jack, the Jack Kevorkian miniseries, sort of
TV movie.
Yeah, TV movie. Yeah.
Very good. Pacino met Jack Kevorkian for many months to greater understand who he was and why he was doing it as well. I really like it. It's kind of a shame it's a HBO movie.
Right.
Sad thing.
Should have had a wider release.
I think so. Yeah, but then it wouldn't have played as big out of the US because a lot of people wouldn't know who Jack Kevorkian is. I didn't know until I'd seen the film, and I was like, oh, okay, he's that guy. Right. Okay. Yeah. I think that's part of the problem, is that he's done a few HBO movies that probably play really well in the US, but outside of that,
Phil Spector was a HBO movie as well, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I mean, thankfully, a lot of people know who Phil Spector is anyway.
Sure.
Through whatever version, whatever you know him from, whether it's the hit songs, whether it's the fact that he was a killer, or just his hair.
The mad hair.
Yeah, mad hair. But I like that film. I really like it.
I think that's okay. That's not one of the ones I haven't seen. So, The Son of No One, straight to DVD.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's it's a film shot in a New York neighborhood. It's all cops double crossing each other. Who's the worst cop and whatever else. Pacino plays a mentor in it. It's a bit basic. It's not great. Not great at all. No. Okay. And it's a good cast. That's the thing. Ray Liotta's in it. Channing Tatum's in it as well.
Ray Liotta being in anything, though, is at the moment, for the last 20, 30 years, it's he's not, bless him. He's still trailing his coat to see if Scorsese will pick it up. But I don't think I remember seeing him at Cannes during the press conference for Killing Them Softly. And he was so pleased to be there because he was there with Brad Pitt and everything. And they asked him a question and he came out with something really, I can't remember. I won't repeat it because I can't remember exactly what it is, but it was, let's say it was a politically incorrect remark.
Right.
And you're just thinking, man, you've got your shot here and you're gonna blow it, and unfortunately that film wasn't as successful as it deserved to be, so it didn't really. I mean, he's brilliant in it.
I think it's a great film. I really like that film. Yeah.
Stand-up guys,
I like it. It's good fun. Elder statesmen still trying to be hard guys, even though they're about 70 something.
Right.
Pacino, Christopher Walken, Alan Arkin. It's a good, fun movie. It lets itself down with the last 5 minutes. I'll be honest by that, because it tries to do something that it shouldn't do. But there's a lot of fun to be had. A lot of fun. I liked it.
Okay. We Are Not Animals.
I haven't seen it, based on the fact that it's not freely available anywhere. This is a movie that John Cusack made.
2013.
Roped in quite a few people who he knew. He knew Pacino from working with him on City Hall. It's not freely available. It's not available actually anywhere in the world. There is a thing online that says it's available on US Netflix, but I am yet to find anybody to confirm that. So this film exists, but doesn't exist.
Okay, John Cusack, if you're listening, drop me a line and we'll see if I can.
Just send it on a DVD-R. It's fine.
Yeah,
that's all I need.
Just a link. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen a bunch of these other films. Phil Spector, I saw. Salome, I saw. Actually, Salome, I went to the. I saw it when it showed at Venice.
Oh,
at
nice.
the film festival, and I actually asked Mr. Pacino a question. To the we did there was a press conference, and I just thought, just for the what's the bragging rights of saying I spoke to Al Pacino. I said something to Al Pacino and he had to reply because of the context. That's the same as meeting someone, surely.
I think it is.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Yeah. What did you ask him? I've got to know now.
I think it might have been something to do with it was a very bog standard question.
When are you making Scarface 2?
No, it wasn't. It definitely wasn't that. I think it was something to do with his love of the theater, and it might have been something to do with Wilde as opposed to Shakespeare or something. But the funny thing is it was like only the second question of the press conference, and he spent the rest of the press conference answering that question. He just spent basically. Someone asked one question. Oh, what was it like working with Jessica Chastain? He went, oh yeah, it was great. And then I asked my question, and he just went, and then that was the rest. Right, that's all we have time for.
There we go. In which case, your question was bang on. Really, let's be honest. So when you saw it, did you see just Salome or Wild Salome as well?
Oh, Wild Salome. They showed them both.
Right. Okay.
They showed the film and the documentary.
Yeah, I think we should point this out to anybody who's listening: is that Salome and Wild Salome are two separate entities.
Oh, wait a minute. I wonder if they just showed Wild Salome. It was definitely the documentary. I definitely saw that. I don't think I saw so they released sort of what they were filming as a separate film, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it came as a double pack. So basically you had Salome, which was just the filmed version of the stage play, but with nobody there, no audience. And then you had Wild Salome, which is the documentary about behind the scenes of trying to put on the stage show, also making it into the film, and all of the problems that he had. Wild Salome, if you're kind of thinking, oh, have I got to watch both? You don't have to watch both at all. Just watch the documentary Wild Salome. I think that's a much better one. You get clips of the actual show.
Yeah, you get quite extensive clips as well.
You do, yeah. But you also get a lot of background knowledge as to how difficult it was for Pacino to put together. I mean, it took him 4 years to edit it, because and I think it was 4 years and 6 editors, because he couldn't get out of his mind what he wanted to put on the screen, basically. He was going, no, I've got this in my head, but why is it not showing me on the screen? So he would get rid of an editor, and then somebody else would come in, and then he'd bring back editor number 1 because he knew what he was doing. But 4 years he spent with this, and it kind of drove him mad.
I mean, as the other thing is, Jessica Chastain absolutely shines I mean, there are scenes in there where because I remember seeing her in that, and it wasn't that long since she'd done Tree of Life, and so she'd really sort of stepped onto the scene as this sort of new actress.
Well, Wild Salome was her first ever performance. That's her entry into the film world. But because it took Pacino 4 years to get the film out, everybody was like, oh, well, we know who Jessica Chastain is because, Tree of Life, Zero Dark 30 as well. Everybody knew who she was by this point. So Pacino's like, well, listen, I found her. And they're like, I don't think you did. Like, no, I did. It's just taken me ages to get the film out.
Hurry up, Al. Hurry up.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on, Granddad.
But you went to the Venice one. I went to the UK premiere. And there's a photo in my book that I took on the red carpet of Jessica Chastain, Al Pacino, and the two producers as well. So I took that. So I was like, I'm going to include that in there. But at the UK one, they only showed Wild Salome, but to the press, they showed both versions. It's a confusing thing, and bizarrely, it was really difficult to get hold of as well, like DVD wise. Now it's freely available everywhere, but yeah, I mean, I had to send copies to people in the US who were in the film because it had not been released in the US.
What about Danny Collins? I've not seen that, and that's one of the bigger ones.
I love Danny Collins. It's so much fun. It's really heartwarming. It's the type of Pacino performance that you kind of expect, but you kind of don't. He's playing this one-hit wonder singer who has he's kind of really got rid of his family. He's not spoken to them in years, and his son is having a really nice relationship, and he's got a son. Then all of a sudden something happens, and he thinks, I really must reconnect with my son. And he says, like, why are you coming back now? We're not interested. And he tries to buy them all the goods because he's got all this money, and he's on the straight and narrow and whatever. It's just a really fun performance. And the wonderful on-off relationship between Pacino and Annette Bening in it is worth the price alone, to be honest with you. Annette Bening's retorts to him sometimes are amazing. Like, there's a moment in it where he's got this garish suit on, but the kind of suit that you would imagine a singer of his caliber to be wearing. Yeah. And he goes, he opens up the jacket and he goes, what do you think? And she went, no, not that much. He went, nah, I look smart. And, it's just something like that. It's kind of fun. I like it just because it is a bit of fluff, but it's fun fluff and a little bit teary as well towards the end.
Oh, okay.
I know.
Okay, you've won me over. I'll give that a shot, definitely. And then we'll sort of at the end, really. So Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and The Irishman are sort of the two big roles that he does towards the end. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I guess, is the more just a bit part kind of. Again, I get the feeling Tarantino's a bit of a completist as well, and he's had De Niro now. He's probably hunting up Dustin Hoffman for his next thing. But with the Irishman, that's the sort of that. Actually, he sort of does the opposite to what he does in Heat. That actually he's the main guy, and De Niro is a little bit the foil.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's because a lot of people know Jimmy Hoffa or are aware of Jimmy Hoffa, whereas obviously nobody really knows De Niro's character unless you read the book. That's the thing.
Yeah, which is I hear you paint houses.
Yeah, I heard you paint houses,
which is also the title Scorsese actually uses in the film.
In the film,
so
yeah, like it flashes up, and you're like, "Hang on, what's going on here?" Obviously, Netflix had a hand in that and said, "We can't have a film called that. It's too long a title. Can we change it?" Yeah, it's a really good performance from Pacino in that. To take a character like that who was both loved and hated for his union work. Once again, we spoke about this earlier. Create a character who you kind of like, you kind of appreciate, really. But what you see him do is not that great. He's hiring a killer here on the side to help him. It's a phenomenal performance. Obviously, motion capture takes quite a bit. Here's the younger one and whatever else. But the weird thing is, when I went to see it, I was like, okay, that's kind of weird initially, but then you get used to it. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that...
I wonder if it'll survive a rewatch, because I did start rewatching it after I saw it at the cinema, and I just, there's a certain point, as you say, I think you get your eye in and your brain is just saying, yeah, okay, I'm ignoring the weirdness, I'm just watching it now. But then I sat down to rewatch it, I was like, bloody hell, that's really jumping out at me. It's very Polar Express, it's very,
That's a good question, because I saw it at the UK premiere, and then when it hit Netflix, I watched it again because the other half hadn't seen it. And then obviously it got released on Blu-ray, so I watched it again. It never really stood out for me, I've got to be honest, but maybe it's just because I have seen so many young Pacino films that I'm just like, well, this is him in Bobby Deerfield or something like that.
Right.
They've scanned him from Sea of Love or something like that.
Sure.
So it never really stood out for me that much, but that's because obviously having watched every single film, it doesn't stand out that much. But maybe for somebody who has only dipped into, Godfather, Scarface, and a few others, you're kind of like, ooh, it's a big change. I think the film is excellent anyway. I like the fact that Pacino finally got to work with Scorsese after all of these decades. They've been trying to do it, and he got to work with his friend De Niro and his friend Pesci as well. He got to go toe to toe with Stephen Graham, and Stephen Graham beat the shit out of him as well. There's a wonderful, Pacino gave a little interview, and he said there's a scene in the film, you'll know this, where he meets Stephen Graham's character, and Stephen Graham's got those shorts on, and he's late, and they go into this thing of being late and whatever else, and they do the scene, and Scorsese calls cut, and Pacino turns to Scorsese and he goes, Marty, did you see that? The kid's got balls. And you're like, yeah, because I imagine there's a lot of actors out there who would not dare go toe to toe with Pacino, but Stephen Graham does.
Yeah,
and it kind of comes out on top as well. That's the thing. Like, it's a really great sequence, and he takes on shouty Pacino and does his own thing, and you're kind of scared as well. And I like the fact that there are actors out there who will still go toe to toe, regardless of the stature of who they're going up against as well. There's not many who would do that. It'd be like going up against De Niro or Daniel Day-Lewis, obviously, when he was acting or something like that. Yeah, I like the fact that there's still people out there who will give it a go instead of going, oh, it's Pacino, I've got to let him win every scene. It's like, no, that's, he's not here. And that comes across in the book actually quite a lot, is that people tell me he's a very genuine actor.
Yeah.
He likes people to explore the scene. He will happily take a back seat. And this is what you were saying earlier, is that, some films, he feels like he's the second fiddle, but he's fine with that. And I think that's the wonderful thing about somebody like him, who is this, let's be honest, he's an A-lister still. Anytime a Pacino film comes out, most people will be aware of it, at least. Whether they see it, I don't know. But you have this sort of attitude of the fact that he's still happy to be on set, even at 80 years old.
Yeah. I mean, I felt it a little bit when Connery died recently. There's a whole generation of actors who, it's a little bit like in the 80s, everybody waiting for that good Bob Dylan album. There comes a point where you just think, I think we just got to be happy with what we got instead of hoping, for something.
That's
and I sort
a
of
good point.
feel the same thing with De Niro and Pacino and stuff. It's like, these guys did their jobs. Everything they've done, anything you get post 1990 from either of these guys or Dustin Hoffman or whatever, it's gravy. It's all good, and they did a lot that was great afterwards. But to sort of expect even more is, I mean, I think The Irishman had exactly that feel of a real miracle film, a real song. I didn't think we were going to see these actors together again under this director.
Yeah, so I completely agree.
So what's your next project then, Mark? What are you working on next? Is Stephen Graham?
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. Stephen Graham's such an interesting actor. Anyway, nothing much, to be honest with you. I'm still doing film reviews every week, so that kind of takes up my time.
Where's your work? Where can we see your work?
So I'm on a couple of local BBC radio stations here in the UK. So BBC Suffolk and BBC Northampton.
Right.
I also do Phoenix FM, which is a community station. So we do 2 to 4 films a week that are, cinemas, streaming, DVD, whatever is out and about this week. And then, so I'm still obviously promoting the Pacino book, even though it came out, oh my goodness, 4 years ago. And then last year I had a book out all about the late, great comedian Rick Mayall.
Oh yeah, I saw you had a book out about him.
Yeah. So
gone too soon.
Yeah, unfortunately so. So, it's these things. I'm still waiting to meet Pacino.
I've met him.
Right, that's the end of this now. Thank you. But do you know what? It's funny as well because the book came out, and as I said to you, I self-published. I didn't really think anything would happen, and then I sent the book to his right-hand man, who I had managed to sort of get in contact with, and then he realized, hey, this guy's not a stalker. He's actually put X amount of thousands into making this book. Okay, right, fine. So then we sort of became friendly and whatever else. And then in 2018, I was in LA, and I was meant to go to his house to interview him. Tarantino moved up the shooting schedule for Pacino's scenes, so it didn't happen.
Damn.
Yeah, and then they were always like, well, look, next time you're here, we'll do it. And then obviously the world went on its axis for the past 18 months, so nobody could go anywhere. But it's kind of interesting. The book keeps coming back around. Only recently did I discover that the book is on Pacino's shelf in his library.
Oh, wow. That's good to know.
Yeah, like I didn't know. It was only when a tennis player, I've forgotten her name now, she was there and she had taken a little video in Pacino's library, and like there was DVDs stacked everywhere. Alvin and the Chipmunks is one of those DVDs, I'll let you know. Hilarious. But at the top, next to a photo of his kids, was my book on display, and I had no idea.
Obviously, he's put that in the corner of love. Things I love, my kids, Mark's book.
I'll take
Alvin
it.
and the Chipmunks.
All I think is, I'm like, you know, it just blew me away that, you know, I had written this book thinking the only person who's ever going to read this is my mom, really. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it's on this shelf, and I'm like, you know, it's not even a side view either. It's like full on display, and I'm like, this is crazy, you know. And I have to thank Leonard and Jesse Melton for that, because they had interviewed Al a few years ago for their podcast, and I had sent Leonard a copy of the book, and he had given it to Al because they'd been friends for quite a few years. So I do have to thank them for that. But, you know, I kind of thought maybe Al left and just put it in the bin on Sunset Boulevard or something. And then 2 years later.
Oh, ye of little faith.
Well, you never know, do you? That's the thing. You just got, you know, celebrities get given so much tact that you kind of think, oh, thank you, they put it in the bin. But yeah, to find it there was just beyond my wildest dreams, really.
Clint Eastwood doesn't. There's a story about Clint Eastwood that when they go to like Oscar parties and where there's loads of swag, he actually has a group of his entourage go around and collect it, and he's just a complete hoarder. It just keeps everything.
I love that. I love that. That sounds like me, to be honest. I am a collector of movie memorabilia, especially Pacino stuff as well. You know.
Well, moving on from that, the final question for you is, what film book would you recommend for our listeners?
I know this is a little bit cliched, but I am going to say it because it was an inspiration for my book, and also I am very pleased to say that he has become a friend. I will recommend Al Pacino's authorized biography by Lawrence Grobel. It's set in stages throughout Pacino's career. So there are interviews in the 70s, in the 80s, and in the 90s. Right. And I think it gives you a wide variety of what Pacino was going through at that time. And they don't just talk about films either. They talk about their lives and what's happening. And Lawrence had been friends with Al for decades. Like, he was the only guy who would do who Pacino would allow to do the interview. And that's because Al saw Lawrence's interview with Brando and said, if this is the guy who's interviewed Brando, this is the guy I want to interview me. And that's how they stayed friends. So look, buy my book first, okay? And then get Larry's book.
Larry's book is like a companion piece, really, to your book.
Thank you.
It doesn't really make much sense if you haven't read your book.
I love it. Yes, thank you. Yes. Sorry, I know it's a little bit cliched, but I have to say that it is a hugely important book in terms of the, finding Pacino, finding who Pacino is. I think that's the thing. Not the actor, but who Pacino is.
I do agree that both those books, both your book and they do actually go well together, in the sense that Grobel's book, if it has a weakness, is that it doesn't feel complete. It doesn't feel as engaged with the movies. And of course you don't, and you're interviewing everyone except Pacino. Mm-hmm. So and Grobel's book is entirely Pacino. So you do get those different perspectives. I think they do go quite well together, joking aside.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I mean, my book next to Larry's would be a dream, to be honest with you. You know,
Right.
it's fantastic. But you know, Larry's absolutely fantastic. He's interviewed everybody anyway, and it is a really good book. It's shorter than mine as well. You know, mine is 640 something pages. Larry's is about 300. So if you start mine now, then you'll probably get to Larry's in about 2023 or something. Yeah.
But yours also has that structure where you can sort of dip in and use it as a sort of like an encyclopedia book, you know, where you're just like, oh, okay. So for instance, I would skip chapters of stuff that I haven't necessarily seen because I want to watch them first and then I want to read the chapter about it.
I mean, thank you for saying that. I had never really thought about that, but then a lot of people told me that. And I, you know, that wasn't in my mind when I was writing it, but it's kind of you to say that. And I do think that, yeah, mate, that's probably the right way to do it. You know, it's the way that you see certain books made about TV shows where they recap the episode and you watch the episode, then you read about what they've written. Yeah, I'm more than happy for people to watch Pacino's entire catalogue and then read about it in my book after.
Well, I'm going to watch Danny Collins now, and then I'm going to read the chapter that I skipped. So
fantastic. Danny Collins, oh, you're going to love it. You really are.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it. Listen, Mark, thanks so much for your time, and yeah, thanks for talking to me.
No, thank you. Thank you for doing this podcast. I find it absolutely fascinating listening to them all.
So there you go. That was Al Pacino, The Movies Behind the Man, and I hope you enjoyed that very much. The recommended book that Mark recommended was Lawrence Grobel's biography from 2003, I think, of Al Pacino, and the two books really complement each other, as I've already stated in the conversation, so you don't need any more pressure or advice before you go off and order those books. What I really ought to do is just thank Elliot Atkins for the music. He's also working on a new version of the theme that goes at the beginning and the end of each episode. So you'll be able to look out for that hopefully in the near future. Great. Thanks for listening. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of your week, I guess.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Welcome to The Right Intention, where we unlock powerful leadership strategies, personal growth techniques, and the mindset shifts that drive success. I'm your host, Todd Tononi, and in every episode, you'll gain actionable insights and inspiring stories designed to help you lead with purpose and confidence. Discover how to develop effective leadership skills, grow personally and professionally, and align your actions with the results you truly desire. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a leader, or someone ready to elevate your life, this podcast is your blueprint for success. Subscribe now and step into the life you're meant to lead.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.